Somewhere in America, a woman gets a cancer diagnosis. She cries. She calls her family. She starts making decisions. The diagnosis was wrong. The machine that produced it had never passed a single lab test. And the woman who built that machine, she knew. This is the story of Theranos and the 3 decisions that turned a dream into a disaster. To understand what went wrong, you first have to understand what went right. Because Theranos was not built on lies from day one. It was built on something far more powerful, a genuine idea.
Theranos means being able to see the onset of disease in time to be able to do something about it.
Elizabeth Holmes was 19 years old when she walked away from Stanford. She did not drop out because she was failing. She dropped out because she could not stop thinking about one problem. Why does a blood test require a needle the size of a finger? Why does it take days to get results? Why does it cost hundreds of dollars? And why, in 2003, was nobody fixing this? She used her college tuition money, the money her parents had saved for years. And she started a company. She called the machine Edison, named the company Theranos, Therapy Plus Diagnosis. And here is what most people miss about Elizabeth Holmes. She was not pretending to care. She actually cared. Her fear of needles was real. Her obsession with accessible healthcare was real. The vision was real. That is exactly what made everything that followed so dangerous. She dressed like Steve Jobs, black turtleneck, every single day. She trained herself to speak in a deliberately deeper voice. She hired Apple designers to build the Edison device. She studied how Steve Jobs presented, and then she walked into boardrooms and did exactly that. By 2013, she had raised $400 million. By 2014, $9 billion valuation. Holmes herself worth $4.5 billion. The youngest self-made female billionaire in American history. Her board, George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, General James Mattis, Rupert Murdoch invested $125 million. The Walton family, founders of Walmart, put in $150 million. The DeVos family, $100 million. Fortune, Forbes, Time. Obama appointed her a global entrepreneurship ambassador. Think about who these people are. Former secretaries of state, 4-star generals, the family behind the largest retailer on earth. These are not naive people. These are people who have spent their entire lives making high-stakes decisions, and every single one of them believed her. That tells you something, not just about Holmes, but about how the story was constructed. And then Walgreens, thousands of pharmacies across America, real patients, real blood tests, real results. Everything Holmes had promised was finally happening. The dream was becoming real, except for one thing, the machine. And what was actually happening inside it is something nobody on that board ever thought to check. Here is what Theranos was actually doing. Not what they told investors, not what they told Walgreens, not what they told patients, what they were actually doing. They were not using the Edison. They were using standard Siemens laboratory machines, the exact same equipment every other lab in America used. Then they diluted patient blood samples to make the tiny finger prick volumes work. Then they reported the results, as if the Edison had produced them. That is not a workaround. That is not, we are still figuring it out. That is deception. And here is the moment the entire empire starts to crack. Diluted blood changes its chemistry. Tests calibrated for normal blood volumes produce wrong readings on diluted samples. This is not a theory. This is basic laboratory science. Any scientist with a biology degree could have told them this. Patients received false HIV positives, false cancer results, wrong pregnancy tests, real people, real consequences, from a machine that was never supposed to be used on humans. But here is where it gets worse. There were people inside Theranos who knew, who saw what was happening, who tried to stop it. Tyler Shultz, the grandson of board member George Shultz. He joined Theranos because he believed in the mission. He ran tests. He checked the results. He compared them to standard lab equipment. The numbers did not match. He went to Elizabeth Holmes directly. He laid out the evidence. He expected her to act. She dismissed him. He went to regulators. Theranos sent lawyers to his home. His own grandfather, on the board, sided with Holmes. Tyler Shultz lost his relationship with his family, his savings, years of his life, for telling the truth. Now here is the financial reality that nobody talks about. Theranos charged patients rock-bottom prices, revolutionary low prices. That was the whole point, democratizing healthcare. But they were secretly using expensive Siemens machines to run those tests. Their cost per test was higher than their revenue per test. Read that again. Every single test they ran, they lost money. Not a little. Structurally, mathematically. Every single time. The Walgreens partnership was not going to save them. It was going to bankrupt them faster, because the more tests they ran, the more money they burned. The entire business model was impossible. Not difficult, not challenging, mathematically impossible. And the board that was supposed to catch this? 2 former secretaries of state, a 4-star general, banking executives, not one person with laboratory science expertise, not one person who could evaluate the core claim. Nobody asked a scientist. Nobody ran an independent test. They trusted the story. And for years, the story held. Until one reporter at the Wall Street Journal started pulling on a thread. And when he pulled, everything came apart. October 2015. John Carreyrou had been working the story for months. Former employees, lab technicians, scientists, people who had signed NDAs, people who were terrified of Theranos lawyers, but who talked anyway. On October 15th, the Wall Street Journal published Theranos response: not transparency, not an investigation, not a recall. Lawyers. Holmes went on CNBC the next morning, looked into the camera, called the report factually and legally wrong, said Carreyrou's sources were disgruntled ex-employees, said the Edison worked, said the technology was real. She lied. On national television, while patients were still getting tested. 2016, federal regulators inspect the Theranos lab. They find what the journalists had found. Holmes is banned from operating a blood testing service for 2 years.
All right, federal officials have reportedly launched a criminal investigation into blood testing company Theranos. The Wall Street Journal reports on the front page that the Justice Department and the Securities and Exchange Commission are looking into whether the biotech startup misled investors, partners, or government officials about its testing technology.
Walgreens terminates the partnership. Safeway, which had spent $350 million building Theranos testing centers, walks away. Between 2013 and 2016, Theranos ran tests on hundreds of thousands of patients. The company voided or corrected tens of thousands of those results, tests that real people had used to make real medical decisions. Some found out their results were wrong. Some never did. 2018, the SEC charges Holmes and her partner Sunny Balwani $700 million in investor fraud. Theranos shuts down entirely. January 2022, Holmes convicted on 4 counts of fraud. November 2022, sentenced to 11 years and 3 months. May 2023, she walks into a federal prison in Bryan, Texas. And in 2025, her first interview from prison. Theranos failed, but failure is not fraud. $945 million from investors gone. A $9 billion shadow empire built on a machine that never worked. The dream of cheap, accessible blood testing was real. The technology to deliver it was not. Before we get to the lessons, you need to understand what this actually means. Not for investors, not for Walgreens, for real people. Brittany Gould, a medical assistant from Arizona. She was pregnant, and Theranos told her she had miscarried. She was close to terminating her pregnancy. Close. Before another test showed the baby was alive. Theranos had been wrong. Erin Tompkins. She used Theranos because it was affordable. She could not afford expensive tests. Theranos told her she was HIV positive. Imagine that. You get that result. You call your family. You cry. You start rebuilding your life around a diagnosis that was not real. She lived with that diagnosis for 3 months. 3 months before she could afford a second test. The second test said no HIV. She was healthy. Mehrl Ellsworth. Theranos told him he has cancer. He does not have cancer, and these are only the people who testified in court. Theranos produced inaccurate results on roughly 1 in every 10 tests. Across an estimated 890,000 tests per year, tens of thousands of people received wrong information about their health. Some underwent procedures they did not need. Some took medications with real side effects. Some lost trust in their doctors forever. And Holmes was convicted for defrauding investors, not for the harm caused to patients. Now, the 3 lessons, not as theory, but as what these real people left behind for us to understand. Lesson 1. Prestige is not proof. Kissinger, Shultz, Mattis. None of them had ever run a blood test. None of them could evaluate whether the technology worked. They saw a compelling story and they signed their names. Before you trust any company, ask one question. Who here can actually verify the core claim? If nobody can, that is not trust. That is blindness. Lesson 2. Secrecy does not protect innovation, it protects a lie. Real innovation can be independently verified. Fraud cannot. When a company answers questions with lawyers, it is not protecting trade secrets. It is protecting a lie. Ask yourself, why can I not have this independently tested? If there is no good answer, that is the answer. Lesson 3. Vision becomes fraud not when you fail, but when you know and continue. Holmes knew. Her lab director told her. Tyler Shultz showed her the numbers. Her own scientists sent her emails. She kept going. She kept taking the money. She kept running the tests. She went on television and called the journalists liars.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
Brittany Gould almost never became a mother. Erin Tompkins lived 3 months inside a lie. Mehrl Ellsworth thought he was going to die. And Elizabeth Holmes sits in a prison in Texas and still says, failure is not fraud. She is right, but this was not failure.